So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rodney Brooks. He's the MIT Professor Emeritus, the founder of iRobot, the founder of Rethink Robotics, and we're going to talk about robots without fear. So nice to see you again. So we'll see what happens with our mics.
Okay.
So when I interview people about the robots that they make or they've seen, I usually start by asking which robot they first met. But with you, it was the first robot that you made back in Australia. So would you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I was fascinated by computers, which I'd never seen, and robots, and started trying to build them when I was about 8 years old. But robots were much too hard, because they had to mechanically work together. So I finally built my first robot when I was about 16.
And what did you call it?
It was called Norman.
Because?
Because there was a silly TV show called Norman Gunston, and it was named after him. But it was really based on some robots that Dr. Grey-Walter had built in Bristol in the 1940s.
Oh, wow.
And with vacuum tubes.
Right.
And mine were transistorized versions. So Norman would wander around the floor, follow lights, bump into things and back away, but it would tend to get stuck under four-legged chairs. It would find its way in and then couldn't find its way out.
So almost there, well, we'll get to the micro rovers, but I just want to deal with MIT. So you built many, many robots at MIT. Is there one in particular? I remember when I first came to the lab, sadly after you had gone, and I met Kismet for the first time and had a real response. That was my understanding of real human-robot interaction.
Yeah, we built lots and lots of robots. I want to say one thing. People here saw Art Scheckman, who talked about people on the spectrum. He actually was in my lab. He built an autonomous colon-crawling robot. We called it ButtBot, but that wasn't my favorite. My favorites were really Cog and Kismet, which were humanoid in form. And what I liked about it was that we discovered how easy it was to get people to engage in social interaction without content. So Kismet would sit like you, nod, respond to, take turns, and extract from the prosody of the voice some emotional content, provide emotional content. And to people who didn't know better, it seemed like they were having an actual conversation. Yeah. And when someone said, I'd like to show you my watch, Kismet, which had fairly simple things about tracking moving objects, would go and look at the watch.
And literally sort of move, I remember that, sort of move and real intent.
Yeah, and so, you know, I likened it to a conversation in the bar at 2 a.m. It's not actual content, but you're sort of going through the...
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength somewhere. I love that. Okay, so whenever we ask people, would you have a robot in your house? Most people do that kind of horrified look and say no, and yet 20 million people have a Roomba, which you were behind with iRobot. But I really wanted to focus on the fact that your original micro rover concept was much, much earlier than that. And I'm not sure many people should know, and we should talk about this, it was deployed within hours of the Fukushima. Would you talk about what was the original intent behind that and how it's been used?
iRobot started out as a space exploration company. We were going to send private missions to the moon and to Mars, and that was our original model. We had, you know, graphics built around that. We were going to send little six-legged rovers to the moon, covered in advertising decals and multiple ones, and then we're going to sell advertising on the moon. And that was inspired by a robot that Colin Angle and I had built in 1988. It was called Genghis, six-legged walking robot, and it was spent many years in the Smithsonian. It's now in my living room. Everyone should have a museum robot in their living room. But Colin then went and worked at JPL for a summer. He was an undergrad at MIT at the time. He's now the CEO of iRobot. And out of that came a micro rover project. And we were really excited. We thought maybe with NASA we could send it to the moon or Mars. Things were slow, though, so we teamed up with the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, BMDO, who had recently lost their reason for being when the Soviet Union collapsed. And we built a little rover that was launched at Edwards Air Force Base, did a soft landing, and was going to go to the moon ultimately. But then NASA got involved, and ultimately they took the prototypes that Colin had worked on at JPL and had since been modified, and that's how the first rovers got to Mars in 1997, the Sojourner.
So there's some of that within Pathfinder, right?
Yeah, Pathfinder was, it was absolutely based on that. And then Fukushima, during the, we had 14 failed business models at iRobot, but we had two successful ones, the Roomba and the PackBot, which was used in Afghanistan and Iraq for roadside bombs. When Fukushima happened, March 11th, 2011, there were no, they didn't know what was going on in the buildings. They knew there was high radiation. We got a call about a week later saying it would be perhaps helpful if you could send some robots. We got them there within 48 hours, and we sent out those robots. They went into very high radiation areas. It was a 40-year-old 40-year-old GE nuclear power plant, and there was nothing digital there. There were just analog dials. So we sent out one robot that acted as a Wi-Fi hotspot. The next robot went out, put a camera on the dial, the pressure, et cetera, put those images back, and that's how they knew what was going on. We're able to cold shut down.
Amazing.
And those robots are still there.
Yes, I was going to say, you can't extract them, can you?
No, and that bought many more of them. Yeah. And I've been to Fukushima. It was the most sobering day of my life going into there.
Yeah. It must have felt amazing actually being able to be part of the solution then.
Very gratifying.
Yeah, I'm sure. We should briefly talk about Rethink Robotics, and then I want to get on to robots in elder care. So sadly, it is no more, but it was just ahead of its time, and it's still very important. You know, I met many Baxters and Sawyers. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, so Rethink Robotics was trying to, it was a fantastic artistic success. It changed what people expect about robots, that you can have them this close to each other, to a person
very personable, especially Sawyer.
in a factory, that you no longer have to use a 1980s scripting language, but you can show them what to do. But now I'm starting to think of them as the Segway of personal transportation, but of industrial robots. The Segway had a critical idea, a personal electric vehicle that you could drive around in the city, but it didn't get everything right. You know, one was that the individual owned the Segway.
And the form factor had
and
some
the form
issues.
factor. But now, you know, we see the little scooters, which and everyone's that's sort of the right thing. But they had to adjust a whole bunch of other things which were beyond that original idea of personal electric vehicle.
I always like the Albert Einstein quote: "If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research."
Yeah, and it wouldn't be called startups either.
Yeah, exactly. So in the last 5 minutes, I really want to talk about you know, something that I know you're very passionate about. I've read many of your writings on this, and I was at the VA hospital recently where they're using robots for cognitive decline. But you're talking about robots that are dexterous, that have common sense. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so, you know, a few different speakers have talked about the demographic change in the world. In North America, in Japan, China coming, in Europe, definitely, Italy, already there. Many more older people relative to the number of younger people. Ratios are going from something like 9 younger people to 1 elderly person to 2 younger people for an elderly person. So what does that mean for elder care? How are people going to be looked after as they decline? And one of the things about decline and health costs is, I think people mostly as they get older, they want independence and they want dignity. Yep. And going into managed care, you sort of give up both those things, and it costs a lot. Right. So if people can stay in their own homes longer and maintain their independence and their dignity, I think there'll be a great pull for that, especially since there won't be enough workers in the managed care. Right. Most places have relied on immigrants for that, and that's not going to work. So how can robots help people in the home? And here's a simple example. Getting the right form factor, getting it to work is difficult. But many people have to go into managed care when they can no longer get into and out of bed by themselves, when they can no longer go to the bathroom by themselves. That's the thing that breaks down. So a robot that can manipulate people can lift them, and now a robot that can lift them has to be able to sense force, just as my robots at Rethink Robotics did for safety.
I could see a reformed Baxter being able to do that.
Yes, but more than that, you know, everyone will expect to be able to talk to these robots. Right. And I think we've all probably had frustrating interactions with Alexa or the Echo or with Google at home. But even more than that, you know, as someone gets older, giving them a frustrating experience as they're saying, get me in the bed, no, that hurts over there. It has, the speech understanding systems also will have to understand, oh, today this person is not making their sentences so well. Maybe there's a problem here. So it's got to be a much more closer interaction.
So more sort of sentient analysis and voice recognition, as well as some facial recognition.
And changing over time the way they interact with a person as the person declines. Or just, in my case, I hope I'll just get grumpier, but and not decline. I'll never decline, but I certainly will get grumpier. I think that's a much more personal version of AI with common sense, as you say, with understanding of people, that most of the neural net-based systems we see today do not have any of that level of understanding. I loved it when Kai-Fu Lee, sitting here, pointed out that the last big breakthrough in AI was deep learning 9 years ago. There's room for a lot more breakthroughs and a need for a lot more breakthroughs as we go into this much more elderly population than we've had.
So how do you, in the last couple of minutes, how do you teach robots common sense? Like, where do you start with that kind of concept?
Well, you know, John McCarthy, one of the founders of AI, published his first paper about that in 1958. We've been working at it for a little while. DARPA has just announced a $2 billion program to try to get to the level of common sense that an 18-month-old has. I think they're being realistic in how much work there is to be done. I think it's something that you know, we really need to try to get away amongst the researchers in AI who are getting pulled into these big companies with high salaries to do exploitation of existing techniques. I think it's going to be important for the world, for those researchers to go back to exploration of
redirect their energies towards saving the world.
Yes, but not quite enough high salaries at the moment. I hope that blip changes.
But your point is that you know, many populations in the world are aging rapidly, so it is a huge business opportunity.
It is going to be, for people who have something that works there, it's going to be a tremendous business opportunity.
And so just in the last minute, I read you online, so you've been writing prodigiously. Are you doing a book? You're developing chapters online? Because I read all your stuff on AI.
So I have a blog, and originally it was going to be a book, but then I talked to my agent, and he said, yeah, you'll work on it for 2 years, and then we'll have a big... And I thought, no, I got to get these ideas out here quickly, because the world is changing very fast. But I have recently figured out what book I am going to write, which is not quite so time sensitive, and it's about the impact across technology of Moore's law, which people sort of understand at one level, but I think it's there's much deeper implication of Moore's law that has changed our attitude to technology, perhaps made us a little too over-optimistic, because Moore's law just kept delivering for 50 years all the time. Other technologies are not going to deliver on that time scale so regularly. So I think there's a lot to be explored. So
you're going to bring a welcome note of pragmatism to the field?
Yeah. Some people call me a skeptic, but I...
Well, at least you know what you're talking about, which is always refreshing.
Yeah, I've been involved for quite a while, yeah.
Cool. I have to wrap up. This was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.